Dun, 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 dun. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Carlos Duran, and today I'm going to share a review with you, The Soul Winner. Charles Spurgeon, great book. Don't let me give it away yet. Let me tell you a little bit about this book first. So, this book, evangelism, salvation, reaching the lost. It's a great book with a compilation. So the way that this book is designed, in the prefatory note, he gives a lot of good explanation of it. But the way that this book is designed, this is a compilation of lectures, teachings, and sermons. So inside of this book, you have lectures that were taught by Spurgeon at the Pastors College, the Pastors College that he founded for up-and-coming pastors. Now, in this book is also on Monday mornings, he would give teachings to Sunday school teachers, church leaders, deacons, elders, pastors from other churches on Mondays. I don't know if it was mornings or nights. I read it, but I forgot by now. Oh well. The focus is that there's lectures in this directly to the students at the Pastors College. There's also teachings on Monday, teachings for the church leaders and ministers and pastors. But then there's also in here some sermons preached by Spurgeon on this same topic, on this same theme. What's really cool about this book is it is so full of great nuggets, I want to call them. So every time I read through this book, I was reading through this book, and every little where that I went, I was just highlighting, because there were just so many things. I was tweeting on this book, I was Facebooking this book, I was texting my friends every little while, all these little nuggets, because there are just wonderful, great pieces. What I want to share about you first on this is the historical part of this book. So this book, like I said, it's a compilation of lectures, teachings, and sermons. In that, they're all done in the 1800s. His book is full of historical, contextual, what I want to say, traces of time. So it's full of traces of time that help set the scene. It reminds the reader of the context, historically speaking. So it sort of places you in the seat right next to a student at the Pastors College, in the lecture hall, or in the meeting rooms, with the students, with the Sunday school teachers, with the church leaders, the ministers, the preachers, even the typical Sunday service. Reading through this sits you right there with them. In his lectures, for example, Spurgeon, he gives these little nuggets, like when he first heard George Mueller preach at Mentone. Now, I don't know where Mentone is. That's just a little nugget. Another thing to kind of get you in the time frame, in that little time frame, is he talked about Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson was one of the professors there at the Pastors College. So he talks about his burrs found on his Bonnie, Scotland. I have no idea what a Bonnie is. That's his nickname for his wife. That's his nickname for his puppy. Bonnie could mean beautiful something or other. But yeah, it's just really cool how he speaks of in this book. So Spurgeon does this thing. He likes to give these little cute little funny little nuggets, right? He talks about Hannah More, and he tells a story about Charles Dickens, how Charles Dickens would never be a spiritualist, because he was present at spiritual, whatever you call it, when the spirit of Lindley Murray came in, is what they said. So he asked if it was Lindley Murray, and the voice said, "I are." Now, that's not really funny if you just hear it like this, but what was funny was, after looking it up, Lindley Murray is actually an American writer and a grammarian. So no way was Charles Dickens gonna believe in something that is fake. Anyways, a lot of the verbiage that's in this book, it's really different than what we're used to hearing every day. Even the way that I'm talking right now is different from this book. Some of the things that he says something like public house. And it's flashing gas light. I don't know what a public house is without looking it up. So that's just one of those things. It puts you back into that perspective, right? In some of his teachings, he gives some specifics for Traces of Time. Like he'll talk about a dear friend and deacon, William Olney. He gives a specific story with a specific date. He says, oh yeah, this time last year I talked to this girl and it was 1887. So he talks about his esteemed brother who they had just prayed for them during one of their, or right before one of their teachings, Mr. Levinson. So all of those little historical nuggets bring us to this trace of time where we're sitting along, we're reading alongside and hearing everything right next to the person, sort of like if it was we were actually there. Anyways, that's a picture of the historical. There are no issues, but there is a really awesome picture that this was put together. Some of the things that the author argued in this book was, well, man, like I said, the content are lectures, teachings, and sermons. And Spurgeon compiled them. He gave what is a soul winner, or what is it to win a soul is the first chapter that you'll embrace when you get here. He starts by answering what a soul winner is not. And then he goes into, what is the real winning of a soul for God, considering the heart as well as the head of a sinner. So he talks about he gives these little nuggets in between all of that. The qualifications of a soul winner. A man that has to have a humble spirit, a living faith. He says, if you firmly believe that God has called you to preach the gospel, you will preach it with courage and confidence. That's awesome. I posted this just a couple nights ago. He said, dear brethren, do be earnest. Put your whole soul into the work or else give it up. Wow. That's just the way that Charles Spurgeon talks, though. Like when he says about simplicity of heart, he says, by simplicity of heart, I mean that a man evidently goes into the ministry for the glory of God and the winning of souls and nothing else. It's just really awesome. He talks about the manward qualifications. An ignoramus, he calls it, is not likely to be much of a soul winner. He talks about sermons to win souls. And in that, he gives that those sermons that are likely to win souls, they're sermons which are distinctly aimed at the conversion of the hearers, he says. Sermons that interest them and that are instructive and that the people must be impressed by our sermons. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. Some of the other things that he talks about that he brings us through is obstacles to soul winning, how to induce our people to win souls, how to raise the dead, how to win souls for Christ, the cost of being a soul winner. There's so much in this little, it's little when you see it like this, but when you see the pages like this, they are just filled with so much wonderful information. I should not have picked this book because I'm going to read it again and again and again, and my Facebook feed is going to be filled with the soul winner probably till the end of the year. It's so good. Some of the other things he talks about is he explains what soul winning is in his chapter, The Soul Winner Explained. Great title, right? And then he even gives sermon encouragement to soul winners. Really cool. Pages after pages. Spurgeon's an awesome dude. That's the talk of what he argues in this as far as being a soul winner, being the picture of evangelism, the picture of salvation through all of that. So it's really cool. So some of the key difficulties or problems with the text, I would say that there are issues with the text. Like I talked about earlier, contextually, there has to be constant researching. If you're not familiar with the verbiage, if you're not familiar with the people, all that kind of stuff. With this, because the pages were so filled, it made for a slow reading. There was so much that could easily be misunderstood. One of the things that I had to do over and over again was go through and find out what this word meant. Research who this person was. Research who that person was. I talked earlier about Charles Dickens and Lindley Murray. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know about them. As soon as I found out about them, it made for a great, funny story. Otherwise, though, it wouldn't have been so funny. One of the small difficulties that I have, and it's just, I might just be nitpicking, in the chapter titled Sermons Likely to Win Souls, I was not in full agreement on the fourth point of that. The point was that people must be impressed by our sermons if they are to be converted. Now, this could be a verbiage issue, and more than likely I think it is. But if what Spurgeon means in that sermon, that people must be impressed by our sermons, this could be a verbiage issue if the sermon must impact a person. If he meant by the definition of impressed to make someone feel admiration and respect, then that's not what I know a sermon to be. I'm not in agreement with him if he's going by the actual definition of the word impress. But he did say something in the context. He said, he gives mention with the sermon that you must feel it yourself. Not as you feel it, but because you feel it. So that kind of leads me to think that he might be talking about more towards like the impact when it's impressed on a person, not so much like that it's your sermon needs to impress a person. There's a big difference there. So that's one of the problems that I have with this text. I really don't have too many though, because like I said, this is going to fill my tweet feed. This is going to fill my Facebook feed for a long time to come. I am very grateful that I read this book. This book has been helpful to me, and I know that it was helpful to those in the day that it was actually written, spoken, taught, preached, because there was a big impact that came out of that. Right? The book was a directional teaching of one of the foundational doctrines of Christianity, salvation, evangelism. Right? Since this book was a compilation of lectures, teachings, and sermons, it was helpful to those who sat under them. And they came for the purpose of edification from them. Wait, did I say that right? The people came for the purpose of edification from them, right? Whether it was students whose goal was to graduate from college with this knowledge on their belt, or if it was church leaders and teachers who noted every principle and factor to begin their utilization immediately from what they learned in these teachings for their ministries to use right away. Or whether it was church members or visitors sitting in a Sunday service, sitting under a sermon that was transforming their thoughts and their lives in the moment. This book was helpful. These teachings were helpful right then and there. I think Spurgeon wanted to compile this all into a book for those reasons. Instead of limiting his audience to just that present time in the 1880s, 1830s, 50s, 60s, a book can impact so much further than he could ever imagine. And he knew that. I mean, think about it. Over 150 years later, and a dead man is still speaking and impacting even in my life by his words. Backing up a few years. This book, with many lectures through the Pastor's College, impacted a huge part of England. By 1892, I read somewhere that 1 out of 5 Baptist ministers in England were an alumni of this institution, the Pastor's College. This came out of that. Why is this book valuable? Because it reaches out into the person to reach out into the lost, to do the work of the kingdom. And that's why I think this book is so important and so valuable. It was valuable to read it for myself. I know it was valuable for those who sat in those lectures. I know it was valuable for those church leaders, those Sunday school teachers, those ministers, deacons. I know it was valuable for those street preachers, for those people who had jobs, who Sunday service church members. I know it was very valuable then. It's very valuable now. And it's going to continue to be valuable. It's going to continue to transform lives because the theme, the topic, serves a kingdom purpose. Thanks. Wait, did I say that right?